Okay, let's dive deep into a challenge that's surprisingly sticky, even in the lightning-fast world of AI reproducing experiments. We see incredible AI research published constantly, right? New models, breakthrough results. But actually getting those experiments to run and verifying the claims, that's often a huge hurdle.
It really is. It's fundamental. Think of it as the scientific method's handshake in AI. You need to be able to reproduce a result to build upon it reliably.
Yeah.
But the reality is many research papers don't provide every single piece of information you need, making reproduction notoriously difficult and, frankly, time-consuming.
And we've got a fascinating source for this deep dive, a paper introducing a system called AutoReproduce. Its mission, well, to automate this messy, crucial process. Our goal here is to figure out exactly how AutoReproduce takes on this challenge and what success could mean for the speed and, the trustworthiness of AI development going forward.
And for anyone listening who's tried to replicate a complex AI setup based just on a paper, you know the pain. It's like trying to bake a cake from a recipe that lists the ingredients but leaves out the oven temperature and baking time, assuming you just know.
Right. You're missing crucial, often unstated details.
Exactly. Crucial stuff.
Which brings us to the core problem. Why is AI experiment reproduction so incredibly hard? I mean, it sounds like it should be straightforward.
Well, the paper zeroes in on a few key reasons. First, there's just the sheer complexity of modern AI methods and their training procedures. They aren't simple scripts anymore, are they?
No, definitely not. Layers upon layers of steps.
Exactly. But perhaps the biggest factor, and this is really interesting, is the reliance on implicit domain-specific knowledge.
Ah, okay. What's that exactly?
It's the things everyone in that specific subfield just understands: common libraries, standard data formats, typical hyperparameters that aren't explicitly documented because, well, they're considered standard practice.
But everyone knows this problem, so nobody writes it down.
Precisely. And it trips everyone else up. Plus, building these experiments often requires integrating work from experts in different areas.
Yeah.
Data processing, modeling, training infrastructure.
Right.
Coordinating all that undocumented know-how is tough. And let's be honest, paper space is limited. Authors often have to leave out experimental details that feel obvious to them, but are vital for someone else trying to replicate it.
So you end up spending days or weeks just trying to get the code to run, maybe even before you can start to verify the actual results. That significantly slows down progress, doesn't it?
It's a real bottleneck for the whole field, a major drag.
Okay, enter AutoReproduce. The paper proposes this as a novel, multi-agent framework designed to automate this whole thing end to end.
Right. The core idea is to take a research paper and automatically generate executable code that replicates the described methods and experiments.
Executable code being the key phrase there.
Absolutely. It uses two main types of AI agents that work together: a research agent, which is good at understanding text, summarizing, analyzing, and a code agent, which is good at, well, code-oriented tasks like implementation, debugging, fixing things.
So research agent reads and understands, code agent builds and fixes. Is that the basic idea?
Fundamentally, yes. The research agent extracts the core information, and the code agent translates that into working code, with this constant collaboration and feedback loop between them.
Okay, but how do they actually tackle that problem we just talked about? The missing details, the implicit knowledge. That seems like the hardest part.
It is. And this is where the system gets really clever, I think. It goes through a multi-phase process. First, phase 1 is literature review.
Sounds standard enough.
Yeah. The research agent performs a detailed review of the target paper, extracting the proposed methods, formulas, high-level experimental settings, just getting the basics down from the paper itself.
Right.
They mention using tools like Miniru to help pull out tricky things like formulas and tables accurately, because just parsing PDF text can fail.
Okay, so getting the explicit info nailed down first.
Exactly. But then comes phase 2, which the paper calls Paper Lineage. And this is their really unique approach to finding that missing implicit knowledge.
Paper Lineage. Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So instead of just reading the target paper in isolation, the system looks at the papers it cites.
Ah, the references.
Yes. The research agent identifies the most relevant cited papers based on things like the field and how well the methods align. It fetches those papers, maybe using the RSIC API or similar, summarizes them, and crucially, tries to find associated code repositories, maybe pulling links from GitHub.
So it's literally tracing the roots of the ideas and the code.
Yes. It's working on the assumption that the prior work cited in a paper often contains the standard implementations or common practices the new work is built upon, even if the new paper doesn't spell them all out.
That makes a lot of sense.
Then the code agent sifts through that lineage code, finds relevant snippets based on what the target paper is trying to do, and combines these code examples with the summaries from the lineage papers,
creating what they call domain-aligned code implementation references. It's like building a library of standard building blocks used in that specific research area automatically.
Exactly right. It's trying to automatically capture that everyone knows this context by looking at the history and the related projects that came before.
That's a really smart way to tackle the implicit knowledge problem. Okay, so phase 1 gets the paper's info, phase 2 gets the lineage context. How do they actually build the code?
That happens in phase 3, code development. And this is where the agents collaborate really intensively.
Okay.
It starts with data acquisition, making sure the data is ready. If it's custom raw data, maybe some pre-processing code is needed. Then the code agent actually analyzes the data attributes. It looks at the shape, the type.
How does it do that?
By sampling data batches and running little code snippets on them. This is crucial for generating code that will actually execute later. It needs to know what the data looks like.
Got it. Checks the data first. Then
Method replication. The code agent starts generating the code for the paper's proposed method, using the summaries, the data attributes it just figured out, and, importantly, that paper lineage knowledge.
And I assume it doesn't just work perfectly on the first try. That would be too easy.
Oh, almost never. And this is where another key technique comes in. Built-in debugging, using that same data batch sampling.
Using the data again?
Yes. As the code agent writes snippets or builds parts of the pipeline, it tests them by running small batches of data through the code. It's like performing unit tests on the fly.
Like a continuous unit test with real-world data snippets?
Precisely. This lets them quickly catch errors related to things like incorrect data formats or shapes going into a model layer, which the paper notes are surprisingly common and frustrating bugs in AI code.
I can imagine. Mismatched tensor shapes. Nightmare.
Total nightmare. The research agent also provides feedback here, comparing the generated code structure back to the paper's description, making sure it aligns. It's this iterative process. Generate code, test on data, identify errors, refine the code using an edate command for concise changes, test again.
That iterative refinement loop informed by actually running data through it seems absolutely crucial.
It really is. The paper emphasizes this. It dramatically increases the chances the final code will actually run. They even use techniques to speed up testing during this phase, like using control flow, break, continue, to only run a few steps of a training loop instead of a full lengthy training cycle just for debugging.
Smart. Faster feedback cycles.
Exactly. And then finally, there's the experiments execution subphase, putting the whole training and evaluation pipeline together, again with collaboration and testing.
Okay, so they have this system. It uses lineage to get context. It uses iterative, data-driven debugging to build the code. But how do we know if it actually works well? They created a benchmark, right?
Yes, and this is important too. They developed ReproduceBench specifically to evaluate systems like AutoReproduce. It's not just a theoretical framework. They built a way to test it.
What's in the benchmark?
It's a collection of 13 research papers covering diverse areas of AI depth estimation, time series forecasting, video prediction, quite a range of tasks.
Okay, diverse tests. And importantly, this benchmark isn't just the papers, is it? It includes something else crucial.
Right. It includes manually curated reference code implementations, usually from the official author repositories, and the verified baseline performance achieved by actually rerunning that official code.
That's the gold standard, isn't it? A solid ground truth.
It really is. It gives a clear target for the automated system. What makes this benchmark valuable is its focus squarely on method and experiment reproducibility by measuring if the generated code is executable and if its results are close to the official ones.
Which is different from some benchmarks.
Yeah, some prior work focused more on, say, comprehensive content replication, like summarizing everything, or maybe just single attempt code generation without this heavy focus on debugging until it executes and performs well.
Because if the code doesn't run or gets wildly different results, you haven't really reproduced the experiment in a meaningful way.
Exactly. The rubber meets the road in the execution and the final performance numbers.
So how do they measure performance on ReproduceBench? What are the metrics?
They use two main perspectives, two primary metrics. First, align score. This basically measures how well the generated code reflects the paper's method and experimental setup. Does it look like the right approach?
How is that judged?
They use an LLM to judge agreement based on key points from the paper. compare code structure to the reference code. And this is highlighted as most useful judge agreement with the paper's key points, using the reference code to understand the correct implementation details. They also validated this with human evaluations.
Okay, so faithfulness to the paper and the reference. What's the second metric?
The second, and arguably more critical for reproducibility, is exec score. This measures how well the generated code actually runs and performs.
Runnability and performance closeness. That sounds key.
Totally key. It has two parts. The exec rate, which is simply the percentage of times the generated code runs successfully without crashing. Higher is obviously better.
Right.
And the perf gap. This measures the relative performance difference between the results your generated code gets and the results the reference code gets. They use a formula to normalize this gap, and importantly, a lower perf gap means your results are closer. If the code doesn't run at all, fails the exec rate, the perf gap is set to the maximum possible value, 1.0 or 100%.
Okay, so you want a high exec rate code that runs and a low perf gap results that are close. That combo means success.
That's the goal, successful reproduction.
All right, the moment of truth. Let's get to the results. How did AutoReproduce actually stack up against other automated systems they tested?
The results were quite clear and, honestly, pretty impressive. AutoReproduce achieved superior performance across all 5 metrics compared to the baseline agent systems they tested, like ChatDev or PaperCoder.
Superior on all metrics. That's a strong statement. Consistently better.
It is. Look at the exec rate, remember, the percentage of times the code actually ran. AutoReproduce, using one of the better LLMs they tested, reached up to 89.74% success rate for generating runnable code.
Wow, nearly 90%. And the baselines?
Much, much lower. For example, PaperCoder was down around 17.9%, so less than 1 in 5 runs actually executed.
Wowza. Okay, a jump from less than 20% runnable code to almost 90%. That's a massive difference for practical usability. You actually get code that works.
Huge difference. It really shows that the iterative debugging process, the batch sampling, is incredibly effective at catching those common execution errors that trip up simpler generation approaches.
And what about the performance? When the code did run, how close were the results? The perf gap?
Also much better. AutoReproduce achieved an average perf gap as low as 30.13% overall with one model and 34.46% with another strong one. If you look only at the runs that were executable, that 89.74%, the average gap dropped to just 22.1%.
Okay, 22% difference on average for the successful runs. How did baselines compare there?
Significantly worse. PaperCoder, for instance, had an average perf gap of around 89.23%. So even when its code ran, the results were generally much further off from the official ones.
So let me summarize that. AutoReproduce not only produced code that ran far more often, but when it ran, the results it produced were dramatically closer to the published verified results compared to other systems.
Exactly. It generated code that was both highly executable and functionally correct enough to replicate the experiment's outcome with reasonable fidelity. And again, the paper points directly to that strategy of sampling data batches for unit testing and debugging as a key reason for this improvement in both runnability and result accuracy.
It's really fascinating that just testing with small bits of real data as you go can have such a profound impact on the final outcome. Did they find anything else interesting in their analysis?
Yeah, they did a few other analyses. They looked closely at the paper lineage component again. Their analysis confirmed that the papers the algorithm automatically selected were indeed highly relevant to the target paper, comparing against papers experts would have picked. So it suggests this method successfully captures that important related work and implicit knowledge.
Okay, good validation. So the lineage idea worked as intended in practice.
Seems so. They also looked at the debugging process itself, like how often the edit command was used. Different LLMs varied a bit in efficiency, needing more or fewer refinement terms.
Any insights into why code failed when it did fail? Common errors.
Yes, this was interesting too. The most frequent execution error, even with AutoReproduce, involved incorrect data shapes during internal model calculations.
The tensor shape mismatch strikes again.
It does. It highlights that while these powerful LLMs can generate plausible code structure, ensuring the precise, correct flow of data tensors through complex model architectures, especially those involving pre-trained components, is still a significant challenge. The debugging helps enormously, but some really complex data flows remain difficult to get right automatically.
Makes sense. Subtle bugs are hard bugs.
Exactly. And finally, they performed ablation studies, systematically removing parts of the system to see the impact.
What did those show?
They confirmed pretty definitively the importance of both a paper lineage algorithm and the debugging plus refinement process for AutoReproduce's strong performance. If you took either of those components out, the results got significantly worse. Both were essential.
So zooming out from the specifics, what does this success with AutoReproduce really mean for the future of AI research itself? What are the big picture implications?
This is where it gets really exciting, I think. If you can reliably automate this often painful, time-consuming task of reproducing AI experiments.
So the core bottleneck we talked about.
Right. You fundamentally accelerate progress. Researchers can verify findings, validate results, and crucially, build upon prior work much, much faster. They don't get bogged down for weeks just trying to get baseline code running. Imagine how much quicker the whole field could move.
You're not constantly reinventing the wheel just to stand on its shoulders, so to speak.
Exactly. And another huge aspect is the potential for democratization of AI research.
How so?
Well, by lowering the barrier to getting complex published methods actually running, reducing the need for that deep, often undocumented implicit domain expertise just to get started, it makes cutting-edge work more accessible. More people, maybe students, researchers in smaller labs, or people shifting fields, can engage with and use these advanced methods.
So it opens up the field potentially, makes it less reliant on being in the know.
Precisely. More people can participate, more diverse perspectives, potentially leading to faster and broader innovation. And critically, it improves the reliability and verification aspect of AI science. With an automated or semi-automated way to check the claims made in papers, by reproducing the results independently, verification becomes much easier and more systematic. This strengthens the integrity and trustworthiness of published work in the field.
It really seems like a significant step towards automating parts of the scientific workflow itself, specifically within AI.
It absolutely is. It moves us closer to a future where the cycle of publishing research, having it verified, and then building upon it becomes much faster and more efficient. It tackles a major friction point.
Of course, it's probably not a magic bullet for everything just yet. I think the paper mentioned some limitations.
Yes, they were clear about that. They acknowledge that the current approach is specialized for replicating individual experimental tasks, as described in a paper. It's not really built to, say, generate entire complex software projects or code repositories from scratch.
So, focused on the core experiment replication, not building a whole production-ready library around it.
Correct. And they also point out that automating the often very messy, complex process of handling and pre-processing raw, unclean data is a separate, significant challenge that's not fully addressed here. They kind of assume the data is in a relatively usable format to start with.
Still, automating the experiment execution and validation itself, even with reasonably clean data, is a massive hurdle to overcome.
Absolutely massive. It's a huge step forward.
So, to wrap this deep dive up, AutoReproduce emerges as a really innovative multi-agent framework. It tackles the tough problem of AI experiment reproduction head-on.
Yeah, its key innovations seem to be that Paper Lineage algorithm for capturing the implicit, undocumented knowledge from cited work.
Right.
And that built-in iterative debugging process using data batch sampling to generate code that's not just plausible, but highly executable.
And they didn't just propose it. They built ReproduceBench, a valuable new benchmark focused on execution and performance, and developed robust metrics to actually evaluate these kinds of systems.
Which is crucial for progress.
And the results are compelling. AutoReproduce showed superior performance, dramatically outperforming baselines, especially in generating runnable code, almost 90% execution rate, with results significantly closer to the official implementations.
It really points towards a future where these kinds of automated systems can help overcome key bottlenecks in AI research, making the entire field move faster and perhaps more reliably.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If AI systems like this can learn to read, understand, and effectively reproduce the experiments described in AI research papers, essentially automating parts of the process of AI understanding AI research itself, well, what are the ultimate limits to how fast AI can evolve?
Yeah, consider how much faster progress could become if every published experiment could be almost instantly verified, debugged, and built upon by anyone, anywhere. If AI can help validate AI, that feedback loop gets incredibly fast.
Indeed, something to think about. That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.